All right, let's get to the main event here. Tonight's speaker, Marty Cagan. I'm super excited to have him back. I'm sure like a lot of you read the first edition of his book when you were trying to figure out how to be a PM and improve how you did product management. He's the founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group. Before that, he was SVP of Product and Design at eBay. Before that, he was at Netscape. Before that, he was at HP. This is the new book, second edition. If you're not familiar with it, you might be familiar with the first edition. And as I said, we're going to be giving away 5 copies. And Marty's going to be talking to us about some of the most difficult product decisions and issues that he's come across in his illustrious career. So without further ado, let's give him a warm welcome to tell us about Product is Hard.
I'm just curious, too, how many of you work at Intuit right now? Were any of you here when I gave a talk last year, a few years ago? I was kind of surprised security let me in. So, okay. But I'll let you ask Intuit people. But Scott Cook, who is a legendary in the product world, asked me to give a sort of a special talk, and let's just say I was a little rough on their CEO, but it was fun for me. So it is great, actually. Intuit is legendary in the Valley. It's probably the original serious product company. But what I wanted to talk about actually was this is not a normal talk, actually. There are a set of questions that I get occasionally that are just really hard. You know, most questions, I've been doing this so long, most questions, I bet Dan's pause like this too. You kind of know the question already as soon as they say the first word or two, and then you kind of know the right, crisp, clean answer. But there are some questions that are really not black and white. And I normally kind of hope those don't get asked, but I wanted to just get them out on the table. And to be honest, I'm sharing with you the topics I'm working on. I'm writing articles on all of the things I'm talking about, so they're kind of the ones percolating. And as you probably know, it helps me when I kind of talk about it, to think through these things. But they're hard problems. And my guess is you've thought or encountered all of them. And I'll also say up front that one of the hardest questions I get, I can't really talk about because it would take easily the entire hour. That is because many of you, I'm sure, struggle with what is really the best way to split up our product teams and give, what team should be responsible for what. And that is a really complicated topic. Many of you know that already. It's got about at least 20 identifiable major inputs or factors that you consider. And it's one of those things that if we got in a room just with your heads of technology and product and a big whiteboard, in a few hours we could have something useful. I'm not at the point where that's crisp. I'd like that to be the case, but that's a while out. But the rest of them I think are reasonable to talk about. And that's so I kind of broke it. I like to think of things in the product world as talking about the people, which is what everything really starts with, and then talking about the product, how do you decide what we're going to work on, and then the process, how do we actually do product work, and then in the new edition of the book, I added another major area in the taxonomy, which is culture. You kind of realize everything boils down to culture. And I've become, seems like more and more convinced of this. And anyway, Dan told you about me. So let's jump into those topics. They're not really in any particular order other than this little grouping. So the first one I want to talk about is, there's an easy answer to that, of course. What's a product manager actually responsible? And we talk about the role and what designers do and what engineers do. But honestly, for a lot of people, that's not such an easy question. And in fact, it's got several dimensions here. There is the most common scenario is the product manager maybe disagreeing with the rest of the team, in particular engineers and designers. That is that sort of question of what do you do. Then certainly there's the question of the relationship between the product manager and his or her boss. director or VP or product. Then, of course, the one that most people talk about is product manager against that. I shouldn't say against, right? But versus the stakeholders, the different stakeholders, and that relationship. But how do you actually, who really gets to decide what? And then, of course, especially in small companies, the role of the CEO or the general manager. And those are really, that gets tricky. Now, one of the reasons it's tricky is because, and you'll hear this as a theme, this has got a huge cultural impact. Some company cultures, these are a lot, you'll answer one way, and in other company cultures, you'll answer a very different way. Now, what I wanted to put out there is sort of separate from the culture, what are really the characteristics of good product managers? Because ultimately, the product manager, at least in, again, the cultures that I personally would call a strong product culture, where teams are really empowered but held accountable, the product manager is kind of on the hook for the results. So kind of the buck stops there, especially if you believe, as I do, of the model of the CEO of the product. Not where they're the boss of anybody, but when they really are responsible for the end result. And in that case, sure, you might say, but I will also point out, and I do this to product managers all the time, that's a really bad way to make a decision. So how do we really make a good decision in a serious product team with some hard problems? There's a book that just came out, actually, that I considered like the best business book of 2017. I strongly recommend everybody read it. It's called Principles by Ray Dalio. He was the founder and CEO of Bridgewater. And I will also say it's a company I've never even been to, but they're a hedge fund company. They're basically, so it's not my world, but I have heard of them because they're famous for running some very serious cultural experiments. And I won't take the time to describe it other than to say it's bizarre. It is a bizarre culture. I would love to just try to work there, to see what it's like. It is definitely, in fact, most of the people that try leave. It's not for everybody. And they tell you that. They're very upfront. But anyway, the book talks about that culture and kind of gives the origin story of Bridgewater, which is interesting. But then he gets into really principles for how people should work, just individual work principles and life principles. And those were just gold. And so I strongly encourage you. One of the things he talks a lot about is how do you make a decision? And, he's just the way he thinks, he sort of turns everything into a set of first principles. And there's this notion that he formalizes that I think most good product people do, which is he calls a believability weighted decision. And the idea is it's not a democracy. It's not like, engineers, designers, we all just vote on something. That's not what he or I is advocating. But what he is saying is that if somebody has a demonstrated competency in something, that weighs more. And so, for example, I've been lucky. I've worked with some rock star designers, the kind where you always want to work with them. You never want to have them leave your team. And if the designer has an opinion about something to do with the experience, like it's going to take a lot to get me to not agree. It's like, unless there's a really big reason, I'm going to leave. And same with engineers. If you've got good engineers to sort of like go against that strong recommendation, that's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, so those are pretty straightforward with the team. For the product manager to actually have that believability weighting, they need to know what they're talking about. And that's the big area where a lot of product managers struggle with this because they don't do their homework. They haven't done the work. And so then you have a situation, in fact, I tell them all the time, a lot of times we have a case in a small company where the CEO is meeting with customers every single week, and the product manager hardly ever does. My view, product managers shouldn't be able to decide really anything. They can play backlog administrator. They can do that. They're not really in a position to make any real decisions. And they hate when I tell them that, of course. But it's like, do your homework, dude. You got to go out there. You got to be there with customers at least as much as that CEO. That CEO needs to, and you need to share what you learn so that they know that you know a lot of what you're talking about, so you are believable. That's key. It's similar with stakeholders. My favorite relationships are when the product manager has done their homework. If you're working with a lawyer, the lawyer has explained to you a lot, maybe some of the laws that are relevant here or the constraints, and you have studied them, you've done your homework, and you're only proposing things that you believe work within those constraints. We do that with contracts, with biz dev. We do that with financials. We do that with marketing. So you've got to do your homework, and then this is a lot easier to do. It's not even so much a me versus the stakeholder. It's like, here's what I think we should do, and here's why, based on what we've talked about before. It's a different dialogue, and same with the CEO. So I guess what I'm really saying is, do your homework and then be smart about who you look to make a decision. Find the people with a proven, record with that. One of the unusual things about Bridgewater is they literally have people carry around what they call baseball cards. Like baseball cards, it has the stats. Well, they actually, and this is going to sound a little out there, did to me, stats like, what is your track record on making decisions? About that. So yeah, I'm not advocating companies use that, but it's really going to be interesting to watch them. Okay, this is a huge common problem, and this is one of those messy topics, right? So many product people. Now, this is going to be correlated with those of you that said you work in a medium to large company, right? It's one of the nice things about a startup. I mean, you're incredibly busy in a startup, but at least it's doing work. In a big company, you're often wall-to-wall meetings, sometimes double-booked meetings, many times double-booked meetings from beginning of the day to the end of the day. And, and this is the worst part. This is the worst part for me at eBay. All these people working. It was a 7-day-a-week place, Pa and I worked. It was all the time. And you'd get people who were working all the time, and you'd have to tell them, I know you're working like crazy, but you're getting nothing done. Really, I mean, that's reality. Is honest, radical candor is what we would call that now, right? But that's true. And they're at meetings all the time. They're not getting work done. I try to be very honest with product people, product managers in particular. This is what I'm about to say is absolutely true with engineers or designers, but if they have a trouble with this, you have a bigger issue because they are makers, right? They are makers. But product managers are kind of caught between. And there's a lot of making and a lot of managing, loosely termed. And that's, and I tell them, I do not know how to do this job if you can't spend 4 quality hours a day, 4 real hours a day. So that's with your Slack channels not driving you nuts. That's with your notifications not driving you nuts, with not on email. And this is harder than ever, right? It's always been hard. Honestly, but I think it's harder than ever. The technologies that unfortunately many of you have done are really good, and they succeed in interrupting us, and it really makes it hard to get work done. Honestly, I've got to the point where if I don't turn on airplane mode on my phone, I just can't get through anything hard. It's because the things we work on take thought. And I don't mean like going off on a walk in the woods, although that's not a bad thing either. You'd be amazed how much you can think about. But I mean, literally, if you're going to sit down with your designer and engineers and customer, you need to focus. And I don't want to sound like I'm a parent lecturing. I don't mean that. I just honestly don't know how to do this job if you can't find 4 hours a day. And there's only 2 ways I see teams do that, and product managers do it realistically. One, a lot of them, especially here in Silicon Valley, those 4 hours are from 6 at night to 10 at night. Really, a lot of them. And then the other way, though, and I don't want to make it. I was guilty of that too. You were guilty of that too. But the better way, I think, is you stop going to all these meetings. Yeah, used to do. And I know that sounds harsh, but, and because most product people feel like they have to be at every meeting where their product is even hinted at. And that is just you gotta get over that. You do. You have to let go. Because there's really not going to be anything interesting to talk about until you get a good product anyway. So one way or another, you got to figure that out. All right. Yeah, 4-hour per day reality. All right. We can't find enough designers and engineers locally. I put that up there because I push very hard for co-located teams. Just the results, especially when we measure innovation, of a team that's truly co-located, that's product design, engineering, really sitting together, not just say building like Building 9 of Intuit, but in the same office, right around the same tables. The results there are just dramatically different than the teams that are distributed. So that's just the reality. Now, we can't always do that. Even in companies that try very, very hard, they can't always do that. And so we need to talk about what do we do in that case, because you're not just going to roll it up and go home. We're going to, first of all, you will probably do remote employees. That's our first choice. Many of you work in companies that have remote employees. I will say that can work way better if the product manager, Dan has been made a product manager, designer, and a tech lead, Ha is our tech lead. If those three can sit together, and Ha as tech lead can talk to the engineers that are elsewhere, that actually works pretty well. But we still get the collaboration that we need to figure out the products. If we can't keep those three together, things drop way down. Contractors, again, if you've not heard the phrase missionaries versus mercenaries, we need so much of what I do with teams, and I know a lot of you care about, is building missionary teams. So much of that. Well, contractor is pretty much the definition of a mercenary. Right? So it's really hard to have that passion about the problem and about the customers if you're rented, if that's what, you're just basically a contractor. And so that's not our first choice. If you do contractors, do it as a long-term engagement, and definitely not statement of work stuff. We are talking time. And then finally, agencies. That is our third choice. Now, some agencies are much better than others as far as working the way we need to work. You're looking for people that understand that you need somebody you're going to invest in, and then you want to leverage for a long time. So messy, but a lot of us have to deal with this. All right, we want diversity on our teams. This is, of course, very timely. I get this a lot. Most companies feel like they're either waking up or they feel guilted into it. I don't know. All I know is most companies are finally starting to they all had some program in place, pretty much every company, but it was doing nothing, right? And so now they're actually under a lot more pressure to show some results. And their biggest complaint is there's no funnel. There's no sources to write. There's nothing. And they're like, how can we do anything? We get literally 3% of our resumes are women or other underrepresented groups. And so I personally feel very strongly about this topic because we've seen for a long time the performance of diverse teams versus non. It's all about great product teams. And it really is true. I mean, a long time ago, I learned a lot of people think you put a team of rock stars together, it's going to be awesome. It's not true, actually. And the diversity of opinion, diversity of mindset, diversity of experience, I don't want to sound politically correct, but that is true. And there's great data behind this. So then the question is, all right, they're convinced. For whatever reason, they're convinced. How do we get some people in here? And I try to tell them it doesn't happen on its own. The hiring managers have to get off their ass and go find these people. It's true. They have to. That's the only way it happens. You've got to go out there and find them. And the thing is, they are out there. And if you're in a medium to large company, you probably don't even have to look beyond your company. I see this all the time. There are so many people in the company that are so much better than the people that are often in the, product organizations. And there's all kinds of dynamics going on there. In particular, one thing that frustrates me about women is so many of them don't think they're qualified. That's just their natural reaction. I'm not qualified. And I'm like, let's talk honestly about the people that are in this job and you. It's really true. And a lot of times they have to push them to trust me, just like you are more than qualified. In fact, partly the fact that they don't think they're qualified to me is a good sign, because that's the humility that's so important in product. The last thing we want is somebody that thinks they're Steve Jobs Jr. and, they know everything. That's pretty much going to be a bad product person. So the talent is out there. The other thing is it is so much easier when you start early as a startup, because imagine you're a 100-person company. You've got like hardly any women engineers. Maybe you probably have a few female designers. Maybe you've got a female product person. So you find a great candidate engineer. This happened to me just recently at the company work. I brought to them an awesome female tech lead candidate, and she interviewed, and I asked her what she thought afterwards. She said, "There's no way I'm going there. I would be the only woman in the engineering org here." And there was maybe some QA, but she was the only, and she's like, would you, she was threw it back at me. Would you want to be the only, it's like, that's, and I can relate. That makes sense. It does. It's not what you want. You want to start early. Get a healthy balance in your organization from the beginning. It makes it a lot easier as you grow. The other thing that I just saw that I'll mention is Atlassian hired a head of diversity, but that it was interesting because she wasn't from HR. I thought that was so cool, but they and supposedly she increased the diversity hires 80% in the first year. First Round Capital, one of the cool blogs out there, good blogs, wrote about it, and she sort of shared her tips, and I loved them. I thought they were very useful. So you might look that up. All right, let's get into process. And I will also sort of warn you, this is a bit wonky, policy wonks. We're process wonks here. If you came to this, that was true last year, so I figured it'd be true this year. You're kind of into the way we do products. So some people use this term dual track. It's Jeff Patton is sort of where I got it from. He got it from one of the clients. But the idea is this is basically the way I draw how modern teams work. That there's objectives, usually OKRs, that drives discovery work where we figure out the right product to build, and then we deliver it in delivery. Now, I used to, in fact, refer to this as dual track. It's been a while. I've been for a long time just calling it discovery and delivery. But a lot of times I'll get that question, but they'll Google it and they'll see a handful of references, and they're like, what's going on? Where is this? And what's really going on is that so many companies use their own term for this. And these are the main ones. Sort of the original one was build the right product, build the product right. Fake it before you make it. That was for 10 years at Google, the way they referred to this. Move fast and don't break things. You probably recognize that. Facebook uses it as well. Build things that don't scale and then build things that do scale. Airbnb, although it really came from Y Combinator, and that is awesome. And I love that personally. It doesn't really roll off the tongue, but that's a great way to explain it because it really makes it clear what you're doing in discovery. You're not trying to have a scalable solution. In the lean startup world, customer development runs in parallel to product development. That's the same concept. In the design thinking world, design sprints or discovery sprints run in parallel to delivery sprints. And largely, I just call it continuous discovery, continuous delivery. But the point is, it's all talking about the same thing. Now, this does cause another discussion that's really important. I think it's a really important discussion. It's like, wait a minute, there's in fact, one person told me, that looks like water. So there's not like a waterfall? It's not a waterfall. So, but that's an important thing. And I don't blame people that ask that because they don't know. And they're really asking, how is it not? And this is really, I think, critical for really all product people to understand. So let's talk about what really make something waterfall. I mean, today it's just sort of a pejorative. You're using waterfall, you're lame, right? That's what that synonymous with. But really what is bad, and I want to be clear, most agile teams, as far as I'm concerned, they are waterfall. So I want to be clear. But what really defines waterfall? There's really three things. First, and this is the defining characteristics, the requirements. Somebody documents requirements, even if it's just user stories, used to be in product requirements documents. And then that drives design. Designers do their work, and then that's all handed to the engineers. Usually it's sprint planning. And the engineers do their implementation. If that's how you work, which, by the way, most conventional agile teams, that is how they work. That is, I would absolutely call that waterfall. And that is bad. Second, result, yeah, that is bad. And I'll try to make clear why in just the second part of this. The result is all output. That's another defining characteristic of waterfall. Meaning there's this process, whatever it is, and at the end of the process, you get a feature or you get a project. And it's output as opposed to a business result. So that's the second defining characteristic. And the third, which is usually cited as the most serious consequence of using waterfall, is that all the risk is at the end. We don't actually know anything about what we have, whether the customer's going to buy it, whether it's usable, whether we can really deliver it on time and at the money we need, and whether or not it works for the different parts of the business until we've already built the thing. If that's how you work, and even, by the way, most people, we think of waterfall like 3 months or 6 months. It can be a 2-week sprint. That's still, if those three things are happening, I argue that's the badness of waterfall. At least it's 2 weeks instead of 3 months, okay? But that is not what we're talking about. So what does, when we look at this way of working, you can see the reason we work this way is to avoid those three characteristics. Literally those three. First principle of this way of working is discovery is all about tackling the risks up front. Remember maybe you don't know, but the four main risks in product are value risk, would people buy it? Usability risk, can they figure out how to use it? Feasibility risk, can we actually build this thing? And viability risk, will it work for the different stakeholders in the business? In product, our obligation is to make sure the stuff we actually have our engineers build is we've addressed those risks. It's going to be worth building. And so in discovery, that is exactly what we're doing, tackling those risks up front. Second, we don't have a product manager that writes requirements or stories and throws it over to designer and that gives it to engineers. Instead, we literally define collaboratively. What that means is product manager, designer, tech lead sit this close and they work it out together. And instead of implementing features from a roadmap, they're solving business problems, usually from an OKR. That's literally what we mean by collaboration. And the third point in this way of working is if we have to do 10 different features in order to get a problem solved, that's what we do. I actually just earlier today, I was with the Google Cloud team, and somebody there threw out the number that right now they're running at about, they have to try 10 different approaches for every one that works. That's an average. And I've been using the number more like you have to try 2 for every one that work kind of thing. But 10, that's, they've got a pretty high bar there. But the point is, that's all out. We're looking for results. If we're measured by results instead of shipping features, then it rarely takes just one try, usually many tries, but we want to do those tries here, not here. So that's where that comes from. One more related to this that this conversation usually brings up. Some of you may recognize this diagram. It was done by Henrik Newberg. He's like very famous Agile coach because he early on helped Spotify. And I love Spotify, actually, and I think they're very good. But he drew this diagram. If you haven't seen it, it's an important one, but he was trying to tell Agile teams, look, some teams will say we're going to have 4 sprints. We're going to build, like, in first sprint, we're going to build some infrastructure. Second sprint, we're going to build another layer of the platform. Third, we're going to start building some services. By the fourth, we'll put a user interface on it. And he's like, that's not really the point of Agile. And by the way, I think he's absolutely right there. But what he says, what we do is every sprint, you start with something useful. And a lot of people get hung up on his analogy because it's pretty obvious that you wouldn't start with a skateboard if you think you need a car, right? But loosen up on that stuff and just say that every week, we've got something you can ride and something you can get from here to there. Now, if I meet a custom software organization, occasionally I do, or an IT internal, the kind where you don't have product managers, you don't have designers, I point them at this and say it's the best you can do. In a product company, this is weak. And I want to make sure you can see why. The way I like to phrase it is, if you've ever heard the old saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, if the only tool you have are engineers, this is your view of the world. You are using the engineers to do all of your learning. The funny thing is, this diagram is the antithesis of Lean Startup. It is absolutely, it's a complete waste. Now let's talk about what we would do in a modern product team here. In discovery, we would do these iterations. Let's just pretend again that we believe those are the right kind of iterations, but we would do them, but instead of taking 6 months, or there's really a car, probably years, but whatever. So instead of 5 significant things, maybe it's 10 weeks, let's just say. Instead of that, we would do this in 2 weeks. And we would do it fast because these are just prototypes. That's what discovery is we're using prototypes. There's 4 main kinds of prototypes, but we'll use whatever. And we would figure out very quickly whether we needed an engine or not, or whether or not it had to take luggage or whatever. We would figure that stuff out. Because our job, remember, this is what I was saying before, in discovery is to test value, usability, feasibility, and viability. And not to progress to using our engineers that are really there. This is people. And by the way, this diagram I find, even though this wasn't my original intention, but it really makes clear why so many teams are so confused over the concept of MVP. Because MVP, from the product manager point of view, they're using it for this. From the engineer's point of view, it's being done through this. They're like, nobody wins. Because the engineers think it's really crappy stuff we're about to launch. Product people are saying, this is taking way too long. So that's what happens when you use the same tool for the wrong job. So the engineers, though, are responsible for scalable, reliable, performant, attainable. You're maybe an early startup and might not be so much of an issue, but for most of us, we've got customers running their business or their lives on our product. And you need to let our engineers focus on this. This is their highest order use. And so we want to make sure they are focused on that. But we don't want to do this for discovery. That's way overkill. This is what takes so long. So we use one of the several kinds of prototypes in order to test, to validate things. And as we realize that there are pieces that are ready to be done commercial production quality, then we put it on the backlog. Now, I took one other liberty with this diagram that I probably didn't need to do. Because what I could have just shown is, let's say you decide, ultimately in Henrik's scenario, they do want the car. I could have shown, well, the car being delivered. But what I wanted to show is that, if the engineers, once you're sure you need a car, so no more games about skateboards or motorcycles. If you're sure you need a car, The engineers should be able to build that car the way they think appropriate. I can pretty much guarantee you they are not going to build like 4 different power systems. They're going to decide the one that's right for the car and they're going to build it. And this diagram is actually closer. So they might make some architectural decisions, then they might actually build out some services, then they might build out some interface. They can do it in the order they think appropriate. The other thing I would point out, though, is if you work this way, this amount of time is generally significantly less, only because of you've probably heard that old saying, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. One of the frustrations in typical Agile and why sprint planning is such a painful meeting is because nobody knows what they're talking about there. Story says so little. Product manager doesn't know yet what they're trying to describe. So there's a lot of unknowns, and so things drag on. If, however, the product has been validated with prototypes, and I have to emphasize, in discovery, the engineers every day are along with us as we learn. It just doesn't take much time. It generally takes about a half hour for the engineers to participate in the learning and discovery so that when it comes to build, they know what it needs to do. And in fact, if there were feasibility risks, they would have explored those here. Like, let's say they're not sure, like literally Tesla wasn't sure that a battery would carry a car 200 miles. They explored that here. And then, of course, they built out car. So that's a really important concept for us. This comes up a lot. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, then sometimes we get kind of the other. My engineers just want to build and they don't want to participate. I've been saying for a while that if you just use your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value. Now, most engineers I know love when I say that, especially to the CEOs, because they know, and unfortunately often they're right, they think the CEO thinks it's just they're there to code. And a lot of product managers unfortunately think they're just there to code. In fact, they think their job is to shelter the engineers from the ugly of the world. They don't want them to see customers in pain. They don't want them to have to hear about business analytics, anything. They don't want them to hear it. They don't want them to stress stress over it. So they and sometimes though the engineers say they just want to build. And first point I would make is that they should be building most of the time. Roughly 90% of their time they should be building, just like a designer should be designing. We want to make sure they are makers for that. But we also want to make sure that they are spending some amount of time on discovery all the time. They need to be part of, and that's because one of the higher order principles in product work is shared learning. You've all seen the problem when the only one that understands why something is necessary is the product manager, and then they throw it over the wall to the engineers and they're like totally not into it. They're either outright skeptical or they're going to just basically go at their pace. And it's our job in product to motivate, to evangelize. And the main way we do that is you've got to bring them along for the learning. Makes all the difference. And by the way, same thing why product managers get so frustrated when a CEO just tells the product manager, just do it, because I said so. It's the same thing. All right. Also, don't shelter them. In fact, it's counterintuitive to a lot of product managers, but one of the most motivating things you can do to engineers is to show them the customer in pain. Show them the customer in pain. It is, most engineers are very personally embarrassed by that. By the way, even if they didn't write the offensive code, it is they feel like this is our company, because this is bad. I'm going to make sure this is fixed, and it's very motivating for developers. And then remember, just even if it's 15 minutes a day to keep them apprised of the learnings of that day, what you learned at a customer, what you learned by talking to the lawyer, just keep them up to date. Yeah, we're in a regulated industry. I hear this. We're a big conservative company. How can we actually work this way? And my view, of course, is you don't have a choice. If you either, I should include, there's a great Reed Hastings or Reid Hoffman? I think it's a Reid Hoffman quote. quote that actually says, if you don't take these risks, it's only a matter of time. But the idea here is, what do you do? Well, first of all, we use opt-in technique. Now, opt-in techniques are not our first choice because they're not as predictive as blind techniques like an A/B test. But you know what? They're really good evidence, and we eliminate that issue. Lawyers are fine with this as long as the customer opts in. So we go to certain customers and say, we've got an experimental version. Would you be willing to run it? Or even 10 of your people willing to run it, or whatever it is. And those are the ones we include and collect the data on. It could be qualitative learning or quantitative learning. This is mostly talking quantitative. For qualitative, we can have them sign an NDA. Also, we lower expectations of the degree of confidence when we do quantitative testing, because we're not going to, with an A/B test, you can get large amounts of traffic, but in an opt-in technique, for example, or an invite-only technique, we are getting smaller numbers. So you can either wait really long before you have statistically significant results, or you can just lower your confidence and say, we're going to make this decision not based on proof, but based on evidence. And that's what we do. And then you have to lean, or you can and should lean more on the qualitative technique. We have great set of qualitative value testing techniques as well as quantitative techniques. So you can absolutely do that. Again, it's not as predictive, but it's incredibly insightful. So we can definitely do that. All right, product topics. All right. Product topics. Our execs are addicted to roadmaps. Yeah, maybe the single most common one I hear. This is a problem for sure. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of product people that are addicted to roadmaps too. I always try, because to me that's disappointing, because they seem to understand the principles behind things like lean startup, but they don't understand that that's the same problem. The same problem. It's just as ridiculous as an MBA doing a 50-page business plan with a bunch of assumptions. Product manager having a bunch of assumptions about a bunch of features on a roadmap actually working. If you believe Google's number that they have to try 10 different approaches before one works, then what does that tell you about the likelihood of your roadmap producing results? You can count on about 10% of them. So it's time for product people to wake up to this. But anyway, I'm talking about execs, and that is the more general case. And also, I understand where this is coming from. I'm not blaming. They basically, first of all, they're trying to run a business, and so they really need to know when things are going to happen. If we're they don't care about little things, but if we don't put little things on the roadmaps either, right? We put the bigger things on there, and if we're going to have something, and then marketing is going to have a big promotion or spending, or a partner's got to plan their time. They're trying to run a business, and a roadmap, even though they're skeptical at this point on whether the dates are accurate, they at least get something, and so that's important. And second, they want to know we're working on the most important things and not just going off and having fun. And so those are the two needs that roadmaps give for them. And that's fair. We need to acknowledge that. So one of the easiest ways that I advocate teams to wean themselves off of their CEO's addiction is is what's called an outcome-based roadmap. Also known as a transition roadmap. An outcome-based roadmap is basically first of all, you have to plan about a year. Doesn't happen fast because this kind of thing doesn't change. CEOs don't change their mind instantly on stuff like this. But if you plan about a year, keep doing roadmaps just like you're doing it today. The only difference is immediately go in for every item on your roadmap. If you're going to integrate some payment system or whatever it is on your roadmap, figure out, or ask whoever you need to ask, but figure out what the business result is that would hopefully get better once you do this. So if you're integrating a payment system to increase conversion rate, then find out who's asking for this and ask them what conversion rate they're expecting. So you're telling us to integrate PayPal. Today we're at 4%. What are you expecting once we integrate? Hopefully it's somewhere. It's probably on some business case somewhere. But they should know. And if they don't know, you make an intelligent choice of what it probably is and just put that there. Say, okay, integrate PayPal is the feature on the roadmap. And the KPI is conversion rate. And our target is up to 6%. And then you keep it there, and every time you talk about that roadmap item, you make sure to talk about the KPI. And then the second part of this, which is really the most important, as soon as this PayPal integration goes live, we start reporting on that business result. So that will make very clear. If you're like 10 times smarter than Google and everything works awesome, you're heroes. Otherwise, you can start to, it's like, well, we launched the PayPal integration. We verified it is working correctly. Unfortunately, it has not moved conversion rate. And so, but we do have other ideas to improve the conversion rate. And it's this process of, and it is a bit ironic because basically this is what we're talking about here is how the board of directors works. They care about the business results. The level of features and stuff is really introduced by that layer of management. And again, we understand why, but it's important for us to try to, if you want an empowered product team, you've got to give them the problem to solve, not the solution. You can't blame them for conversion rate not getting better if you tell them it's not negotiable, you got to integrate PayPal. That makes sense to everybody? Because that's pretty basic, but you can see a big disconnect there. Every team using roadmaps and supposedly using OKRs. Most OKR implementations are silly. Yeah, they're not doing. But I am bullish on OKRs, and I'm going to talk about it. All right. I thought this was a funny one recently. This happened like 9 months ago or something, and immediately I started getting emails and questions when I visited a team. Mostly designers were really bent out of shape about this. I don't know how many of you saw that, but it caused a lot of swirl. Now, in fairness, he works at an agency. And at an agency, you don't have product managers really as your client. You have a bunch of what we would call business owners, usually in marketing. And they change their minds. They give requirements like crazy, many of which, probably most of which, drive the designers nuts. And they know that if they're given those requirements, it's going to be a bad design. My guess is he was having one of those bad days where his designers were really frustrated with these crazy clients, and you can't, that's your business. But unfortunately, this is the most common complaint I hear from designers at agency, that they're hired guns. They have to build what the client is telling them to build. Of course, and he was giving the example, an engineer built something some way, and it was now 7 seconds response time, and it just ruined our design, kind of thing. So his answer is, the engineer is a designer. They might not know it, but they're a designer because they just, screwed up the design. And that is, and my point is, he's confusing two things. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. My guess is he knows this, but I still think it was a very ill-advised way to phrase it. Because there's no question these people are not designers. They're not. The engineer is not a designer. Do they do things that can impact the design? Absolutely. So can what? Lawyers, people doing pricing changes. The competitors can mess with our approach. Salespeople and their capabilities mess with our stuff. Government compliance changes, laws mess with our stuff. Privacy, brand issues, financial constraints, security. Well, these are all real contracts. These are all real. This is our world. I mean, this is your world, right? We're talking about This is what product managers deal with. The point is, the reason product managers are so important is because requirements come from all of these areas. I hate that word, I'll be honest. There's like in the new book especially, I don't even think you can find the word, except maybe this is, requirements are not really requirements. The job of product manager is to figure out the underlying constraint. What is really going on? Remember, every customer is going to describe things different, all of it. What we need to do is identify constraints. Now, and of course, just to be clear, what designers do is solve for constraints. That's what they do. Well, I love them. Engineers solve for constraints too, but they're doing different. They're solving for implementation, and designers are solving for experience, but they're solving for constraint. They can deal with a 9-second response time as long as they design the experience around this delay. And so we need to be clear on that. And also we need to make sure the product managers understand, you've all seen the Dilbert cartoons making fun of product managers, and the idea they're the ones that just gather up requirements and pass them on. They are not helping because all they're doing is passing along their requirements. They're not doing the work to understand the underlying constraint. This can radically improve your designer's ability to do a great design and your engineer's ability to come up with a great solution. All right. There's one. Bet pretty much everybody has struggled with this one. Well, unless early startups, but it doesn't take long before tech debt is a big issue. And in bigger companies, a lot of them are crippled with tech debt. And so this is just, this has always been a thing. Even when like early eBay lost a third of its market cap through major tech debt issues because people lost confidence in their ability to keep the site running. But luckily they survived. I was at Netscape, as you saw, but we died because that's why we lost the browser wars, actually, tech debt. So tech debt has always been a thing. The internet combined with Agile, combined with misguided lean startup usage has made it even worse. And so today I see more of it than ever. And so we need to talk about tech debt. First of all, the company needs to treat it as it is, which is a business continuity issue. This can literally kill companies. Now, don't get me wrong. I've never been one to say you should have no tech debt or anything like that. Nope. There's a reasonable amount of ongoing tech debt, and always working on that tech debt is healthy. But way too many companies let it get way out of control. And basically, when it gets to, it doesn't even have to get to the point where you have major outages. If you get to the point where you cannot respond to the market and where you can't take care of your customers because it takes your engineers so long to build anything. And by the way, your engineers will typically say, at my last company, I could have done this in a week. Here, with these systems, it's maybe a month, a lot of unknowns, because every time we touch this, we have a huge problem. So ultimately, it is the engineers. Well, I should say this. Be careful. It's the CTO. Ultimately, it is the CTO's job to make sure your systems, your architecture can meet the needs of the business. Now, a lot of the CTOs complain to me because their head of product doesn't let them work on tech debt. And my answer to them is, you're wrong for asking the head of product. Because, and to be clear, and there's lots of examples of this, I'm not telling, they're the one that's going to get fired. They're the one. So it is not up to the head of product. This is the CTO or VP of engineering's responsibility. But first and foremost, you got to treat it as a continuity issue. It's a serious thing. If you're in serious trouble, you need to make a hard call. This is never fun, but I always tell them, look, dial up your engineering capacity, dial down product and design. Product and design isn't going to be able to do much anyway. In fact, you can usually see a sign of tech debt. It's not definitive, but it's a good indicator of tech debt if the backlogs are too long. If there's like more than a month or so of work queued up, you're out of balance. The engineers are not able to keep up. Not for sure, but very likely due to this. So you got to get more balance. We got to put as hard as we can to get that architecture to where we need it to be. And which means for the product people, you have to pick your battles. You cannot do everything you want to do for your product, which we never really can, but you can't even do the what we're used to settling for. You will probably get only about half of that, which means you don't get much in a quarter, which means you better pick wisely. Better make sure you're picking things that move the needle. So that's a hard problem. How many of you are using OKRs now? Okay, about half. Yeah, I am a big advocate of OKRs, but, and this drives me nuts, because the truth is, I am hoping for a better system to come in the next few years. I do not think OKRs, I certainly hope they're not the last word, because too many teams have way too much grief when they move to OKRs. Now, even then, I still advocate them. I've been using them myself. That was actually taught at HP. It was the predecessor version, which is not that different, but it's called MBOs. But it's I'm sold. But I think I realize why it's so much grief. It's conceptually, these are not hard, right? OKRs are not hard, but in practice, the reason I think they're so difficult is because they force the cultural issues to the table. So the most obvious one is OKRs are supposed to be, KRs are supposed to be key results, but that are results, business results. Most companies bail on that, the main principle, and they just put the features from the roadmap. All it is a cosmetic difference from the roadmap. They integrate PayPal from the roadmap. It said Q1, integrate PayPal. They move it to their OKR for Q1, integrate PayPal. That is missing the point of OKRs. The idea is you have an objective for the business, like increased conversion rate, and you have a measurable business result. Get that conversion rate to 6%. Integrate PayPal has no place on an OKR. That is one of don't get me wrong, I love PayPal's great sometimes. It really depends, right? It really depends. It's good for some companies, and I use that as an example because so many companies I know have integrated PayPal and got nothing. And that's not really PayPal's fault. It's not. It's not like it broke. It just wasn't the problem that needed to really be fixed. They already had ways to pay. Usually the issue is people don't want to pay. I mean, that sounds, flip, but it's true. It's really value, right? They don't really want this. And so it's like, oh, I would have got this, but I didn't have PayPal, So anyway, that's what OKRs are about. But you can see if you really do that, that's going to force some cultural change, like execs and their addictions to roadmaps again. So it brings to the surface these issues. The other thing I want to say, though, I also admit to you, I do not recommend OKRs to everyone, because to really do OKRs, to really give a team business objectives and empower them to solve that, requires a pretty high competency of that team. If you've got let's just say novice team, not really with the experience that's necessary, they're going to be like a deer in the headlights. They're going to be waiting around until somebody tells them to integrate PayPal. Really. So you have to have a pretty good, so really OKRs are predicated on pretty good level of competence of the team and the organization. So you've got to want to truly empower the team and be willing to do that. But to me, those are the only kind of teams I want to work with. To me, life is too short. Those are the teams that are going to really do great things. Those are the teams I want to help. But, so I see a skew of the industry. But that's really, I think, why OKRs are so difficult. because they are forcing this issue. It's not a conceptual thing, it's cultural. Which leads me to the last topic, which is culture. So, see this all the time. As we grow, we're getting more risk averse. I bet many of you have heard that. Now, first of all, you got to realize that there's a lot more to lose. That's one of the nice things about startups, nothing to lose. You don't have to worry about stuff. Remember Airbnb, just having fun? Did you notice their listings in San Francisco this week are half what they were last week? Why? Because now they're a company that people care about, like Marriott, and they don't like them, and so they lobby against them, and sure enough, Airbnb has to follow the law now. Don't get me wrong, I love our Airbnb, but they now have to deal with business viability issues like Marriott does or like other big companies do. And so it's, as you get bigger, there is a lot more to lose. That doesn't mean that we don't need to move fast and take risks, but we have to be sensitive to that. This is where, when I talk about CEO of the product, I am talking about that product manager who understands all elements of the business. I recently started doing something with the product managers I coach, which is when they're just starting out on a new product, I'm having them fill out a lean canvas for their product. It's already done, but I mean, the product's already there. But it seems like it's a great way for them to realize this is not just about giving a backlog and grooming it for developers. This is, if you're going to make good choices, you have to understand how sales works, how marketing works, how the financials work on this. What are all the contracts that impact us? What are all the business constraints that impact us? If you don't know that, then you probably are going to have to escalate all these decisions up to some either CEO or some other executive. In which case, again, you're just a backlog administrator, not a product manager. So, yes, it's product managers. This was part of that do your homework. You've got to understand these elements of the business. Okay, my engineers just aren't excited about what we need to do. Most product managers know they need their job. In fact, it's their responsibility more than anyone else to make sure their team is a team of missionaries. So, what can you do? You can bring them out to see users and customers in person, preferably in pain. Right? Which is normally not that hard, right? And, well, a lot of the times we're asked to go to customers, it's because they're having trouble. But it's always good. Oh, there was in the latest Jeff Bezos shareholder letter, and they're gold, by the way. If you don't read that every year, you absolutely should. It is his literally gift to the industry every year. And one of the things he says, I mean, he had this great line in there too, which is no customer ever asked for Amazon Prime. Which is true, right? Any good innovation is really, it's not coming from the customers. That's a whole other talk. But and he said, one of the great things about going to customers is they are always unhappy, or always really, and he's trying to say there's always more they want, always more they need. It's like, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So, yeah, get out there and then share the full business context with your team. Everything. Share with them your cost per customer. Share with them your lifetime value. Share with them how much money you're losing on every customer, if it is. Share with them the economics of your business. Whatever, any part of that context, that helps them and it motivates them, especially when it's difficult, which it usually is, because that is motivating to developers. These are, as a general rule, very smart people. One of the things that's always, so I did spend most of my career, I had one exception to that, which was eBay. Everywhere else in my career, including, and by the way, I just hit 35 years, so long career, but it has always been doing products, or now services, you could say. I coach teams with teams, developers mostly, but not end consumers. It was only at eBay that I was really doing consumer services, but and enterprise, it was developers. And one of the things most people realize, there's one thing that's been constant about our industry is there has been a constant stream of great innovations for developers. I mean, you don't have to look further than AWS for that. What did they just hit? $17 billion. Amazing. Anyway, why is that? My belief is because developers have constant access to the customer. Now you could say, well, they're the customer, but it's beyond that. It's that their friends are the customer. The people sitting right next to them are the customer. And developers, when they see somebody that has a real problem, they want to fix it. They want to come up with a better solution. That's my belief for why there's so much innovation in the developer platform space. And people say, well, they're just not motivated to solve problems for the enterprise or for the finance side. It's totally not true, because the companies that actually bring those developers to those finance people in these other, they get just as motivated and just the same level of innovation. So what's really going on to me is it's about connecting them to the customers in pain. Not only the engineers, but it is a big one. Engineers they're consistently our best source of innovation. Remember, they know the technology better than anyone. They can see what's just now possible before most of us. And so you really want, that's when I say the magic happens. All right, my CEO tells me what to build, and just trust him. A lot of product people complain about that. Yeah, that's an issue. Because, well, first of all, very often the product manager has not done their homework. And so, you kind of can't blame the CEO for that. But even when they have done the homework, a lot of times they haven't shared what they've learned. So the CEO doesn't really know that they've been doing this every week and learning about the customers. Also, one thing that really irritates CEOs is they know what has to be done. And I'm saying, let's now for a minute grant them the benefit of the doubt. They're right. This has to be done. We do need to integrate PayPal, let's say. And they say, just integrate PayPal. Don't argue. And the product manager's like, well, we have to do validation. We've got to go and prototype this and validate it, make sure. And that's really frustrating for them. It's super frustrating for them. It's like, really, we're going to lose? If the team's good, maybe it's only going to take a few days or a week, but it could be like 2 or 3 weeks. And like, really, especially if you're a startup and you're sort of trying to race for survival, a lot of CEOs won't tolerate it. And even if they do, they're really bitter about it. I try to tell the product managers, be smart about this. Pick your battles. You can be learning things as you go and go out to customer. You say, yes, let's go do that. And as you go forward, you can do some validation as you're going forward. Or maybe this isn't the big one. So worst case, you've got like a lot of other e-commerce sites, you add a PayPal button that nobody uses. Who cares? It's not going to kill your business. All right. And then be very transparent about what you learn. Share it. That's critical. And finally, especially with executives, 2 things. Prototypes, especially, I know I actually already told the Balsamiq guys I love Balsamiq, but in this case, I want high fidelity prototypes. With executives, I want high fidelity because executives care. I've learned not to show my Balsamiq prototypes to executives. Most of them cannot get past a wireframe. Now, I kind of finally figured out why. They care about the brand. It's their baby. And wireframe is sort of intentionally not showing that. Now, some of them, they just really have no idea about design and they're really uncomfortable. But most of them, they want to see what it's really going to look like. That's the bottom line. So you either have to decide that now, you're going to deal with it now, or you're going to have to deal with it later. But especially with these executives, high fidelity prototypes are fantastic. And there are many tools that will help you do that. Not as fast as you can do a balsamic prototype, but fast. Okay. And then data. It's amazing. This is really the big difference in product between how it was done years ago and how it's done today. But data is amazing. It's sort of the big equalizer. It's not like it guarantees you that you will win the argument because it's just part, but it's so different. Because when it was my opinion versus the CEO's opinion, I lose. If it's, who knows, but let's look at this data, it's a very different discussion. So one of the things I learned, and my go-to answer for things where there is a disagreement, is just run a test. And kind of one of the things I specialize in is lots of fast ways to run a test that don't take forever, that we can get some evidence quickly. All right. Almost there, Dan. This is the last question, but I actually think one of the hardest questions of all, which is it even really possible to change culture? Because a lot of what we're talking about is culture. Hopefully you'd agree. It's culture. And so that is no question it's super difficult to change. The question is it possible? First thing I want to emphasize is that product culture, what we mean by product culture, this sort of willingness to run lots of tests, to make decisions based on data, to do lots of validation, to be humble that you're probably wrong on a lot of these things, and our job is to figure things out, to know what you can't know. These are all what we mean by parts of what we mean by product culture. That's a subset of broader company culture. So, for example, Amazon is probably the best company I know for product culture. Is not a company culture for most people. Anybody who tells you otherwise, just not being honest. And now some people, I just learned the kind of people to introduce to Amazon because they have to be the right personality. They have to not have significant others or children or anything. They have to be I want to work constantly and learn more than I could anywhere else. I want to do that. So great for that. It's a rough culture, but oh man, are they awesome at product. And other companies are, all over. Those are different dimensions, so they can be all over the place. Of course, my favorite places would be great at both. I would argue Netflix is pretty awesome at both. There's other companies too. Etsy is pretty awesome at both. And there's different cultures, and it's a whole dialogue. But here's the thing with culture. I mean, let's talk about Uber. Because Uber, first of all, most people, well, I certainly think they have an awesome product. Service is awesome. The company has not been awesome. And it's kind of been the poster child for the worst of Silicon Valley. And I'm personally thrilled, even though I try very hard to help the founders stay in place, not in this case. And so I'm thrilled that they made a change. The challenge for them is the thousands of middle managers that were hired under Travis. That's the challenge. And by the way, all the people they hired. So it's you have a large company that has some people in there that are just thrilled it can finally be a place they're proud of again, but they have a lot of places. This is just the way culture works. It's stuck in these middle managers, and it can take many years to kind of evolve a culture really to change. So that's what makes it hard, and I definitely hope they do it. And I know quite a few people that would never consider going to Uber before under Travis that are now joining. Many of you probably do. There's a lot of good people that are joining. That's like the best thing. But there'll be sort of a struggle, which they know, or at least the ones I tell you, prepare yourself, because you're going to find the people that, even though they won't say it out loud, they are a reflection of the old culture. And there's this desire for the new against the entrenched old, and you're going to deal with that. That's why it's so hard to change culture. I do think it needs to start from the top. That's why that needed to happen with Travis. But on the other hand, it doesn't actually change for the people. Remember, most people, what really impacts the culture is their manager. So they got to deal with that. And that's kind of where a lot of the culture discussion ends up going. But the nice part about that is that just focusing on getting better at product is usually a subset that we can manage. The hardest part of that is usually the OKRs and the roadmaps. All right. Those were a pretty random set of topics, but hopefully, you know, hopefully you found that useful. You can see the things I'm thinking about working on. And I'd love to, if anybody has thoughts on them. There's my email right there. And I always love to get question, comment, anything. I'm happy. Dan, do we have time for any questions?
We definitely have time for questions. The way this works, though, is you have to raise your hand, and someone with the mic will give it to you. If you don't have a mic, don't ask a question. That's how it works. All right? This guy's raising his hand. Good job. Here you go. Thanks, Marty. Let's give Marty a big round of applause. That was a great talk. Come on.
For organizing. I've been in product management. My spouse, she's also in product management. My question for you is, you earlier I saw your bio, which was you were in eBay, you did platform, then you were in design at Netscape. Can you give a sense of the differences between platform product management and the application level product management or the user facing product management, and how were the challenges in those?
Sure. Yeah. And I kind of did that. Well, first of all, most product managers are not platform product managers. They are either they're what we would just call a product manager. It might be an enterprise product or a consumer product, or a device. A lot of my time was at the platform level, both engineering and product. And there is something called PPM, Platform Product Manager. The other thing first of all, the most obvious difference is it's very technical product management. In most companies, you're not a candidate for a platform product manager unless you're a current or former developer. Just because that's who you're doing things for, and there's just a high learning curve otherwise. And in fact, it's also true that in a lot of good companies, and we're talking about platform services, mostly APIs is the interface, mostly that sometimes the product manager is the tech lead. It's a dual job. It's a lot of work, but it's a dual job. Remember, at the platform level, you're really you're there to help all the other teams do their thing. And even go back to Uber, they have a huge platform services team, and they're there to help the rider teams and the driver teams deliver great experiences for riders and drivers, which is also one of the differences in normally if you're in a regular product manager, your OKRs are pure business results. Grow the number of drivers, make them happier. These are real KPIs for drivers. On the other hand, if you're in the platform team, you're really there to help those teams. So we kind of bend the rule on business results because you're going to really be there. Although some companies, they kind of do in between and just measure the satisfaction of the other teams that are using their stuff. But yeah, we loosen that. I think the hardest kind of product management is platform because you have so many constituents and you have very demanding requirements because everything above is sort of rolls down. A lot of hardcore stuff. That's where a lot of the machine learning is going on right now. That's where big data stuff goes on. That's where things like authentication goes on. And so, yeah, it's hard. I think it's great. It's hard. Trying to think if there's any other relevant differences. Of course, most API or microservice teams, for example, don't have a designer on the team. Most of the time that's okay because you're doing APIs that don't necessarily manifest in an interface. Sometimes you wish you had a designer because you are doing things that eventually show up, but most don't have them because there's barely enough designers to go around for the user-facing team. That's a difference too. There's also the ratios are usually a little different. There's more engineers per product manager. Sure. There's a question right here. Choose. Oh, sorry.
Great. Thank you, Marty. As I think about a lot of the topics that you mentioned and most relevant to about KPIs and the lack of the fact that you get a lot of business stakeholders telling you about features as opposed to the KPIs and the business results that they want to drive. The one problem that I did not see, or one of the things that makes it hard for a product manager to create that focus on what problem we want to solve for, is prioritization. And despite all the number of ways that we have to prioritize, and Dan teaches us many of those ways in his program, if we don't ever have that culture of prioritization and how do we evaluate and stack rank and compare things and to know what are we going to do first, second, third, and maybe not even the rest. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, good question. But so first, I should be very clear. There's prioritization occurs at many levels of a company. There's business strategy, which has priorities implied, like when are we going to go international and things like that. And I don't think we're talking about that. And there's product strategy, which is like what target markets are we going to go after in what order. I don't think we're talking about that. You're probably talking about how do you prioritize your roadmap. And maybe this, or hopefully this won't surprise you, but I think you're already up the wrong tree. That is, remember what I said, or let's use that Google example as it's fresh in my mind from a few hours ago. It's going to take 10 different ideas to solve a problem. It's not about prioritization. It's about trying lots of ideas much faster. The way we do, so there is a priority which comes in the OKRs. And not everybody does this, but a lot do. Most people do OKRs. It's like 1 to 3 objectives and 1 to 3 key results for each objective. I push the leaders to prioritize those objectives and key results because that will be important to us. But once, let's say you're the CEO, I'm the product manager, you give me my 3 prioritized objectives. I know what I have to work on. And it's not about a roadmap. It's about trying out 40 ideas this week and figuring out at least a few that move the needle. So it's not really about that. Then, of course, we have to prioritize what goes in the backlog to build, but that's really much more for our engineers to decide the best order to do this. It's more, to me, a symptom of a problem.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thanks, Marty, for the
I can repeat it if you want.
Thanks, Marty, for the presentation. So my question here is on the product discovery part. So we iterate things and we finally arrive at a product, then we pass it on to the engineering team to scale it and build the infrastructure around it. So my question here is, so when do you decide how much data is too much data to stop while doing the iteration part so that I can next move to the scaling part?
I think I understand. Are you referring to that graphic I had?
Yeah, the next
This
one.
one?
Yeah.
So you're asking, so let's be clear, and analytics is a huge topic. It is a great topic too. But we collect, most people think of the analytics we collect here. These are production analytics. This is what Optimizely runs off of, stuff like that. But we collect analytics here too. The difference is this is only sometimes statistically significant. This is usually statistically significant. So and a lot of times it's qualitative here, it's quantitative here. So every time forget the car thing, let's get past the car thing. Let's just say we've got 100 ideas. We've got a big objective like reduce or increase the conversion rate. There's an objective. Or increase engagement. You guys all hopefully familiar. This is what good product teams are actually doing rather than chasing features on a roadmap. So these are our objectives. And we've got lots of ideas, and ideation's great, lots of ideas. We don't stress over sizing those ideas because we've got techniques that let us try out these ideas really of many sizes very quickly. And anyway, we will evaluate those ideas, sometimes quantitatively, sometimes qualitatively. Data comes in if it's quantitative. And then as soon as we have sufficient confidence that this is worth building, so never proof, but reasonable evidence that it's worth building, then it goes on the backlog. Then the engineers do their thing. And as soon as it's live, we're collecting production analytics. Now we're getting 100% of the traffic. And that's why Optimizely comes in here, because once you get 100% of the traffic, we can run lots and lots of split tests, and we can optimize the funnel.
One more. So how do we avoid bias in this team? So there might be a team, so like same type of people building a product, so which may not be well synced with the users across over the day, say in that discovery stage.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid the design bias that happens?
But which kind of bias are you worried about?
So it may be some tech savvy people building a product. So someone who is not so tech savvy might be, the usability may be tougher.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't usually, I should try to rephrase. The question was, how do we make sure not we're just building what we want to build? Really. It might be the engineer, or the designer, or the product manager. And so when we actually are in discovery, now I want to be clear, you don't have to do this on everything. This would be on the risky things, big risky things. Usually, you don't have to do it in this order either, but normally we will test on our users and customers first. The reason is because if it doesn't work with them, nothing else really matters. And when we test with users and customers, we're really testing usability and then value. Kind of have to do it in that order. I can explain why if you're interested. But we're doing that. We're trying to see, could they use it? Would they use it? Or would they buy it? If it's already a product they've bought, it's about would they choose to use it. If they haven't bought it, would they buy it? So our most important bias is that's why we do that. Because we pretty much know we're going to be wrong. In fact, the principle that stuck with me from Mark Andreessen, which was the co-founder of Netscape, I learned a lot from this guy. But what really stuck with me, he said, most important thing in product, knowing what you can't know. And it kind of makes you humble. And it's really true. And so we test with users and customers, like the buyer, the users, if it's B2B. It's consumer just with the. And then once we've done that, let's say we iterate 10 times. I actually want to step back 1 minute. Because before we even show it to users and customers, I want to give a plug for why I love Balsamiq. That is why. Because we often will iterate many times. Just us. You, me, the designer, we will iterate 20 iterations. What's great about this Balsamiq, we can do that in a half a day. Literally 20 iterations. Trying many different approaches. Because I say that because until we like it, we don't want to go waste the time and go try to see if customers will buy it and all that. So we'll use Balsamiq there often, again, for a hard thing. We'll get it to the point we feel good. And then we'll go do a value test and a usability test. And again, if this is a complicated thing, it probably is going to be a high fidelity user prototype. There are other cases too, depending on what we're building. But, and then let's say we do 10 iterations and we're good. We've now made it so they have no trouble figuring out how to do what they need to do, the tasks, and they convince us they would buy it. Either qualitatively or quantitatively, we get convinced. That's another discussion. I could explain how we test that, or you could buy the book. And then once we're good, then we want to double back with the engineers because they have hopefully seen these iterations if we've been doing our job and followed along with us, but we haven't really asked them to like essentially what you would call scoping. We haven't asked them to really tell us if this is for sure feasible. And so now we let the engineers play with that prototype, go through each of them, QA or test automation, whoever, we let them play with it because we are trying to make sure they feel like, yes, we can deliver it when we need it with the skill sets we have, with the componentry we have. And then and we might need some iteration. But once we're good there, the product manager will typically take the high fidelity prototype and they'll look at all the different business stakeholders, remember the CEO of the product, and maybe they'll say, for this thing we're working on, it needs FDA approval, so I'm going to have to go to the compliance officer, and I'm going to have to go to the lawyer. But I think everybody else is going to be okay, so I'm going to go take the high fidelity prototype to them and show them what we want to do. That's basically, and when we get good answers there, then it goes on the backlog. That piece. It might be a feature, it might be a whatever. Does that make sense? I know that sounded, I picked an example where like they were all risks. mostly in practice, there's only a couple risks or one risk or sometimes no risk. And you just say, put it on the backlog. All right.
Mike.
Hi.
Hi, yes. I've been involved in some accelerators, and there's a big debate in accelerators is, when is a product manager relevant in an early stage startup? Let's say there's 10, hello. Hi, there's 10 people in a startup. When is a product manager relevant for an early stage startup? Is it a CTO, the product manager, is a CEO, or?
Oh, great question. And so, of course, there's lots of opinions on this, but for me, I'm a strong believer that in a startup, one of the co-founders should be the product manager. They don't have to have they wouldn't normally have the title product manager. They have a title like CEO, or they have a title like CTO or CPO. But whatever their title is, doesn't matter. It's usually just co-founder. That's the one that's focused on product. And I like that to stay. I actually like to stay quite a while. At a certain point, that will become too much. They will have some choices to make. Like if it's the CEO, they're going to have to decide, are they going to do like Zuckerberg and stay with the product, or are they going to and hire like somebody else to help the other stuff, or are they going to hire a product person and then they'll focus on the fundraising and stuff and managing the board and let that product person do that. So yeah. Bring in. I'll even go a little further. If you've got an early stage startup with a co-founder or let's say two co-founders, typical, and one of them is really, it's their baby, the product, that product manager is probably not going to be well received, even if the CEO thinks they should hire. Usually they think that because some board member tells them they should. But that is not usually the case, because now it's like, it's their baby. And by the way, they've just done like 100 customer interactions. They have all this knowledge, and they see this person come in that has none of that. And basically that person is forced to be asking them for every decision anyway.
Hello. There it is. Hi, Marty. Let's see, I have a question for you. I know you started off with the kind of the scenario saying that, when you're working with your subject matter experts, you give them all the kind of room to make that call, right? Because you respect their insight. Perhaps it's not always ideal like that. And can you talk about maybe some successful techniques you've experienced where it's about decision making? Is it the use of a hierarchical weighted voting type of technique? Is it dots? Is it more equitable, or someone's just going to say follow my lead? That sort of thing.
Well, let me make sure I understand, because I think in your scenario, and let's just pretend that you are a product manager and you have a designer, but it's a really weak designer, super weak designer, and that's your real issue. You are trying to figure out, because you want to defer in principle to a designer, but like that's crazy. That's like an abdication of your responsibility, because that person does not have the experience to make that call. Is that our scenario?
That could be a valid scenario, yeah.
All right. So assuming you are doing a customer-facing product, my view is get a designer. Yeah, really, get a good designer. That this is way too important. Way too important. I keep thinking of balsamic. One of the things that drives me nuts is product managers playing designer and doing all the balsamic wireframes and handing it to their, quote, designer. To me, if the designer will take those wireframes happily, I'm nervous.
Okay, how about adding on to that?
Designer, though.
Yeah.
How about adding on to that and saying, okay, well, I'm the product owner. Now you have a standoff between the product owner and the UX lead or what have you.
Yeah. Well, again, if the product manager doesn't feel like they have that experience on the team, well, first of all, you could go to the manager of that designer and say, we have a big decision here. I'm nervous about this. I would love you to weigh in. Very easy. And so you would go to an expert on that. Or maybe it's at an agency you have a relationship with. There's a technique that's not expensive called a heuristic review. Have one of their experienced designers take a look at it and basically say, no, I think this is fine, or no, we have to redesign this. Yeah, and we pick designer, could be anything. It is very awkward, though. I mean, this is a tough situation, especially a common one is you have an engineer that becomes a product manager. I was in this boat. And now, you as product manager, but former engineer, you might think you know a lot more about the engineering than the engineers do. Very quick way to get a unmotivated team. So I try to coach the product managers to like bite your tongue. They've got to learn. They have to learn. So you really got to be careful there. Similar with the designers. Give your designer as much latitude. One of my favorite designers told me the guideline she does is if it can fit on a napkin, it's fair game for you, the product manager, to describe a design. As long as it fits on a napkin. If it's like more than that, no. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. You mentioned a framework earlier for trying to figure out whether or not you have too much tech debt. You said if what's on the backlog is going to take over a month, then perhaps that's too much. When it comes to experimentation versus meeting commitments that you have to your customers already, we do a lot of experimentation. I think we do a great job, but we do have existing customers that pay us money to deliver our product. Is there an analogous framework for evaluating when to make a decision to do more experimentation on things that are new ideas that you don't know versus things that the customer might be actually asking for that may be in line with the product strategy?
Okay, you are kind of combining a few important issues there. One is, just to be clear, when you say experimentation, I'm thinking discovery. This is what discovery is about. We're running experiments. We're doing a lot of stuff. We're also going to customers, but we're validating, prototyping. We're thinking through the solution. This goes on in parallel with this all the time. It's not a phase. Neither of these is a phase. Just like your developers don't like develop and then go off for a month. It's like always. They just keep releasing, keep developing, and in discovery, we're keep discovering. We will just work on our objectives until we hit the key results. Sometimes if it's going well, we'll go beyond the key results. If an idea doesn't work, we usually toss it aside and try another idea. Again, that's why those roadmaps lock us in. It's a great quote from Bezos again, which is stubborn on your vision, but flexible on your details. And those roadmaps are detailed. So you don't want to lock yourself in. Now, so the short answer, if we just talk about our normal work, that is your work, is to figure out the solution that needs to be built. But I think you're also suggesting a scenario what about working on some bigger goals in parallel, in addition to some people call it keep the lights on, right? Just the stuff you got to do as part of our job. And you might be asking, where does that fit in? And first of all, that I want you to do that. I want you to think beyond, and I want to make sure you're focused on customers and not just doing low risk optimizations. Discovery is where we would normally do that. One way that you can get some big chunks of time is because a lot of times product and design are just really struggling to keep up. And I always tell them, what a perfect opportunity to let the engineers focus on technical debt. Seriously. In fact, I always tell the engineers, if that backlog starts running out, don't even ask. Just switch to tech debt. Take the pressure off. Now, because the developers probably desperately need a month to go do that. Now, in that month, you can do a lot. A discovery sprint, a design sprint only takes a week, and you could do huge things in a week. Which I'd love to see you pursue that. So, you wouldn't do 3 weeks or 4 weeks of discovery sprints in a row. That would be brutal. But one in that month would be awesome. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Marty. Thank you again. Wanted to ask more of a philosophical question about the role of VM in a company where we're saying, embrace failures, that ethos of go big, go for the moonshot, and my PM mentality of you have to tackle the big risk fast and early. Where does that mentality of embrace failure fit in our roles?
Good. Actually, my partner, Chris Jones, just wrote an article about this that I really enjoyed. I was the one who encouraged him to publish it. This topic of embrace failure, fail fast. He was really referring to the situation because there's really two kinds of failure, the good kind and the bad kind, right? Failure in discovery is the good kind. That's, in fact, one of my favorite discovery coaches, a guy named Tom Chi, who ran Google X's discovery team. And he likes to say, he doesn't even like to call it fail. He calls it learn. Learn fast. So the point is, you don't succeed or fail with a test, with a prototype. You just learn. And in fact, he likes, if it doesn't work well, you usually learn a lot more. So that's what this is. Now, I do want to be clear. This was the point of his article. If you go forward and use your engineers to build releasable product and it fails, that's not good. And that's what we have to be careful. That is not what meant by fail fast. That is, don't fool yourself. That is bad. I'm not saying that people should be terminated with this because we try hard, though, to avoid that. That is not what we embrace. We do postmortems and figure out, how could we have figured that out here? One of the companies I really love is Etsy, and they are quite good at this as a discipline, and they screwed up on something, and they actually launched something that didn't work, literally didn't achieve their objective, and they were surprised because they thought this was clear. You know, sometimes you make a judgment. I even encourage teams, it's okay. Once in a while, you're going to be wrong. You just think it's not risky, but it really is. Anyway, they launched something and it didn't work, and they had a postmortem and like, that would have been a 5-minute test in discovery. Why didn't we do that? Well, they didn't even think it through because they didn't think it was a risk. This was the infinite scroll stuff, if you're interested. But anyway, that's just be clear. What's the good kind of fail and the bad kind of fail? I don't think it's good that I use the term. I've said fail fast a lot up here, and I don't want people to think this is an okay fail. This is what we try hard not to do, because that really is a waste of our engineers and even the opportunity cost. You're never going to get that time back. If you're a startup, you usually got like 18 months of time, and that goes super fast. If you're a big company, it's not usually that you run out of time. It's more like management loses patience in about 6 months, and so the clock is going against that, or lose confidence.
Why don't we do like 2 more questions and then we'll. Yeah.
So thanks, Marty, for this awesome talk. A question on which are some of your favorite products and who are some of your favorite product managers?
You know what? I got a great answer to both of those. I put it in my book. Highlighted 6 of my favorite product managers and 6 of my favorite products. And I'd encourage you to read it. But if you don't want to spend the money for the book, look at the article Behind Every Great Product. I hope you do read it, actually, because there's some amazing stories in there.
Okay, we're about to give 5 away. Okay, last question.
Hey.
When you were talking about the definition of a waterfall, we kind of meet the definition of the 2-week waterfall.
Okay.
So how do we go about changing that, and what does a good collaborative team look like?
Well, good. That is what I'm advocating here. So, and I don't want to sound flip on this, because honestly, to answer that question takes me a solid day, because that is what I just literally did that a couple days ago with a group of people. I went through how we do that, just a solid day. That's because there are a lot of techniques. You want to set up teams, and let's see. The 3 big things, though, I think I had it somewhere else. Let me show you. So, yeah, as long as you figure out a way to do these 3, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm hawking the book, but that is what the book talks about. But it's if you do those 3 things, first of all, you're not waterfall, but more importantly, I think you'll make way faster progress and have real innovation. That's what's important. And so first, you got to tackle the risks up front. Value, usability, feasibility, viability. Don't write a line of code until you've tackled those risks. Second, you want to put that product manager, designer, and engineer together. And even if you could tell, I really get frustrated with those teams that are given those roadmaps, or because that's taken. Well, that's the violation of number 3, is what it is. So I don't like it. But even if you were to say, all right, we got to integrate PayPal, do that with the designer and the engineer side by side. Because there's still 100 ways to integrate PayPal. I mean, not 100, but there's like half a dozen ways to integrate PayPal. I mean, legitimate ways that they tell you can do, depending on so at least together. And that's defined collaboratively. That's the requirements, the design, and the technology. And then finally, don't celebrate just by releasing something. Only celebrate when it actually gets the result you're looking for. First of all, we don't really do release parties so much anymore because you release every day. What's the nonstop party? It's like, yeah. But we don't do that. We celebrate release is kind of a non-event. Pushing something live happens all the time. What matters for a good team is you accomplish some business result. Like Facebook fixes fake news. We should all celebrate when that happens. And maybe we should boycott them until they do. I don't know. I'm thinking about that. So, all right.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Let's give Marty another round. Thanks so much.